Alma Ensemble Summer Interview Series. We have Sarah Wardle-Jones with us.
Hello.
And Erica Sipes.
Hello.
And I am Michelle Smith-Johnson. We are the co-founders of the Alma Ensemble, a chamber music collective based in Roanoke, Virginia. We are thrilled to have Anne Midgette here with us today. Anne is an author and a music critic whose writing and interactions with readers have inspired important dialogue within the music community, especially the classical music community. Her resume is unbelievable. We are thrilled to have you here. Welcome, Anne. How are things in your part of the world?
Things are great. Thank you so much for having me. That's a very starry introduction. Things are fine here. I'm sitting in New Mexico, where it's supposed to go up to only 95 today. So it's a cool day here.
Lovely. Well, it's raining here, so it's a little bit dreary, but it's nice to sit inside and chat. So
exactly. Grass is always greener, or in New Mexico's case, browner. So
exactly. Do they even have grass there? I guess so.
They do have grass, yes.
Okay, good to know. I've never been there.
Another place to go.
Well, Anne, I'm going to start off.
Okay.
And I mean, I have known you for a while now. I met you because of first meeting your husband, Greg, who's also an amazingly inspirational person. But I've always been so impressed by, I don't know the right words, but you do such a good job of inspiring dialogue.
Oh, thank you.
Amongst so many different swaths of people, really. As a musician, I've always been challenged by your calls to be creative as musicians and to just think outside the box. And so one thing I'm curious about is you've been doing music critic work and writing for quite a while now. Do you feel that there's been an evolution to how you have approached your role as a writer and as a music critic and as an advocate, really?
Absolutely. I think there's been a huge evolution. I didn't start out intending to become a music critic or dreaming of being a music critic. It was not at all on my career radar. I was going to write novels, and I was never going to be any kind of journalist. And then I gradually began writing about the arts. But I remember saying vehemently to one of my mentors that I was never going to be a critic, because as we know, critics are mean people who say nasty things about arts, and I was on the side of the artists. And I became a critic when Opera News told me they were going to make me their critic for Germany. I was living in Germany at the time, and I said to the editor-in-chief, I said, I can't be a critic. I don't have the background or the knowledge or the desire. And he said, you'll learn. And he sent me to review the world premiere of an opera by Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. That was my first ever review. So when you're starting out like that, I don't have a music degree. My degree was in classical civilizations, which was ancient Greek. You kind of want to prove that you can do it. First of all, you're thrust into this kind of old boy network. And I should further add that when I began as a journalist, even though I was writing as a critic, I was writing about lots of things. Visual arts and opera are really my strengths. And so being a classical music critic, as we know, brings with it assumed expertise in so very many areas. And no one person can be expert in all those areas anyway. So I didn't ever think of just becoming a music critic. And it was really when the New York Times decided that they were embarrassed. They had never had a woman writing about classical music for them. And it was a freelance position, but they only considered women for it. They brought me in. At that point, at the New York Times, as the only woman feeling like a complete imposter, you're just trying to play catch up. You're like, so you're trying to do it like the boys do it. So you think, well, I can't talk about this stuff. I have to talk about this stuff. Let me legitimize myself. And I was already a lightning rod I got a lot of pushback those first years. It's really hard to me looking back at some of the reviews I got flack for to understand how much they were hated. It was really a function of me being me and having a different kind of voice coming in. And I never knew what I did that was so awful, but I got a lot of reader mail and I got pushback within the field. It was a really interesting time. Anyway, so then I eventually became chief classical music critic of the Washington Post and came in there also like still wanting to prove myself, but with a slightly different thought about it. It's like, okay, this is my baby now. Like, what do I want to do? And I was talking to Doug McLennan, who founded artsjournal.com, which is that wonderful aggregate site for arts news across the field, and a lot of blogs as well. And Doug was putting forth an idea that was still pretty new at the time, but he said a critic should not be an arbiter of taste, but should be the locus of a watering hole where people can come and gather. And that made so much sense to me, and also helped me resolve this idea that critics are bad, because I know I'm not bad, but yet there I am, upsetting lots of people and being very blunt in my opinions. But I realized the whole point of my job as a critic is not to make you think what I think. The point of my job as a critic is to make you have your own opinions. It's to stimulate the field. And if you look back at 19th century criticism, they're coming out with all guns blazing. They're really intent on having their opinions made known. And we're much more timid now. We tiptoe around and I thought, yeah, the point is really to get people writing you, to get people contacting you and thinking and talking, because so many of our classical music audiences are sort of terrorized into silence. They don't think they have the right to have an opinion, and they don't think their opinion's going to be valid. And they're very apologetic when they advance it. They always say, I don't know much about music, but, and I wanted to take away that. I think really the point of a music critic is to let people play along. That's sort of the goal of it. So it's evolved tremendously. And also I really always wanted to keep that original thing of, I'm not a critic, I write features, like I can discover things about the field. I thought it was important for a critic to do both. And when I started out at the Times, you were supposed to do one or the other. Critics weren't supposed to mix in the business of it. And that seems to me stupid, because then what you have is a lot of uninformed critics, who say, why didn't they do it this way? When often there's a very good reason why they didn't do it that way. I don't pretend that I always knew that, but it's a common critical pitfall, and the person reading it is like, well, I wanted to do it that way, but I couldn't. So I thought writing features was always an important part of what I did. And then you get a lot of pressure at a newspaper, not pressure, but editors really want you to write opinion pieces too as a critic. And so those different urges all merged together for me in a kind of piece that came to be something I like to do about, taking on a feature/opinion piece about a big topic. The most famous of which, I guess, was my piece on Me Too, which of course couldn't be opinion at all, because it's so hemmed in with legal stipulations about what you can and can't say. We had to be very careful, and it was a whole different kind of writing for me, but it grew out, I think, of that impulse to take on the field in a bigger way and not just be presenting little bitty views of individual concerts.
I actually read that piece this morning, and it was incredibly powerful. And I was sharing with my husband and was like, these stories are just gross. Like, I can't, you just can't even believe it.
And any Me Too piece you read in the paper in any field, you have to know that what you're reading is the tip of the iceberg. I know that with ours, we had to leave a lot on the cutting room floor. There was a lot that you couldn't put in. You can't just be throwing out accusations willy-nilly. But I know that's true, whether it's Bill Cosby, whether it's, anybody you read about. And the AP did the Placido Domingo story. I know that was true in that case. It's really sobering, the depth of these allegations. And there's the same story to be written about race in classical music that hasn't been written yet. That was something I really wanted to do, and I think my one regret of leaving my job last November is that I never got to do that piece. But they didn't really want it then, so I couldn't do it, so that's fine. But
right, even though it's as valid then as it is now, obviously.
Well, now they should really do it. This is
sure.
Piece, and there's a lot to be said.
Well, and a lot of those points that you discussed in your response just now run a lot of parallels to the things like people are afraid to talk about race relations in the United States, and they don't feel like they have enough information or seats at the table. And, just it's parallel. You need the information to be able and go and feel confident about speaking out against injustices, et cetera.
But it also takes a moment. Me Too had a moment, because there were women who were trying to say these things before the Me Too moment happened. And now you're seeing the same thing in race. Why aren't people speaking up? And I'm like, people are speaking up, and we're in the moment, but we're not getting the stories told quite, they're just beginning to be told. I think we're going to see it for a while, and I hope that makes it on in classical music. I know some people are thinking about it, so.
Well, changing gears, I guess, is so our ensemble came together partly out of a desire to research and give a voice to music written by women who have been obscured or even erased by history. So you're currently writing a historical fiction novel about Nanette Streicher, the woman who built pianos for Beethoven, but throughout history, she was overshadowed by the work of her father and then of her son. So if you would talk to us a little bit about your inspiration for this book and maybe a bit about what you've learned through your research.
Yeah, it's a really wonderful project, and I'm thrilled to be able, of course, the shutdown, I haven't been able to devote myself to it full time because I have an 8-year-old son, but I will be able to devote myself to it full time. This book began, I was researching a story on Schubert for the Wall Street Journal in 1997, and I was in Vienna because I lived in Munich. So whenever I wanted to research a story, and I didn't really know much about Schubert. And one wonderful thing about being self-taught is I said, okay, I think I'll go to Vienna for a week and write a Schubert story. And I went to all the Schubert performances I could find. I went to all the Schubert places. And so Schubert and I have this passionate relationship that I might not have had in the same way had I actually studied Schubert in college, like most people do. But I'm trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Anyway, I was at the Beethoven house. As part of this, I thought I would steep myself in the information about the period. And it was January and there was nobody there. And the curator kind of took a shine to me. I kept asking him all these questions. And so the last 2 tourists left and he goes, come here. And he brings me into the room where Beethoven, one of Beethoven's many pianos. Obviously, Beethoven had famous pianos that were by Broadwood and Erard, but here was a piano that they think belonged to Beethoven. And he lifts the lid off and he said, play. And I can't play the piano. All I can play on the piano is Send in the Clowns, which I taught myself to play in high school. And I had this moment of like, I cannot play Send in the Clowns on Beethoven's piano. It just is not, it's not okay. So I played a couple of chords and, whatever, and I said, thank you. And he said, now you can never wash your hand again. And he said, and yes, this piano was built by a woman. And I said, excuse me, like what? And he said, oh, you could look it up. He said, we're very proud of our piano. And I had no idea. So of course I did look it up. And that is the genesis of this project. I just became more and more fascinated by her. But Nanette Streicher was the daughter of a brilliant man who played a huge role in piano development in 18th century Europe. Mozart loved his pianos. Mozart heard Nanette play. She was a child prodigy. Nanette took over her father's workshop and moved it from Augsburg to Vienna after her father died. So she moved it to the big city, established it there, having married the man she loved, who quit his own career to support hers. Kept it going. She really had it all. And this is one of the reasons I'm doing it as a historical novel too. I don't think an academic biography gives credit to the fact that a woman that having it all like that is an achievement. She had a husband who loved her. They had kids who loved her. She had a successful career and she was very content. She wasn't thwarted. And so many historical figures we read about were thwarted in many ways. Obviously, she encountered sexism. Obviously, she didn't get the same acclaim as many male builders, but she was a central figure in Vienna at that time. And then her son took over her workshop and became Brahms's favorite piano builder. So there was the Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms, and you're putting a woman back in there. But what I learned as I researched, because you hear about this and you think, oh, she's a unicorn. Like, how did that happen? And the most interesting thing I found, which is kind of a dumb moment, is she wasn't a unicorn at all. There were lots of achieving women out there. She was part of a whole network. Even when she was growing up, she had role models. There were other women taking over their husbands' workshops, for whatever reason, and their father's workshops. And moreover, in Vienna, in the Enlightenment age, women were more recognized. And if you read the Biographical Dictionary of Musicians from 1796, there are a bunch of women in it. And you read the same dictionary from like 100 years later, and all the women are gone. So it was really a crackdown. And, Vienna goes very conservative after the Napoleonic Wars. And you get this social crackdown in the Metternich era where there's kind of a secret police going and everybody gets very straight and narrow and women are shoved back into their box. But they weren't there in the Enlightenment. And we aren't taught that because we get the tail end of that biographical dictionary from 1896 and then it goes to the 20th century and those names are all gone. And so the standard wisdom on Nanette was that her husband was the piano builder because her husband did a lot of the correspondence for the firm while she was making the pianos. And so you used to find references that said it was her husband's work. Now I think she's more widely known in musical circles, but as far as, I talk about this book a lot. I should be writing it more than I'm talking about it. And people are always like, I didn't know about that. She's not a household name. And then of course, biography is written on a very male template. Carolyn Heilbrunn has this wonderful book I always cite called Writing a Woman's Life, which is about the challenges of biography, because all the ways you measure achievement are male, even the sort of not, and then they got married and lived happily ever after. You don't often explore the nuances of the relationship or what it does. And standard male biographies write women right out of it. So to try to fit a woman into that template is already not doing her justice. As I said, you can't fully appreciate the sort of she had it all aspect if you're going on exactly what did she achieve, like what did she invent for the piano, and you're looking for those check marks. And I wanted to find a way to tell the story that did more justice to more women and to the period and freed her from the template so that it could be a story. And also I think it will reach more people. I think it has the potential to interest a lot of people outside the field, and that classical music desperately needs to stop being so male, and that this is one way to do that. So it's a continuation of what I've been doing, just more a project of my heart.
That's wonderful. Well, we would like to go ahead and pre-order 3 copies, please.
To all prospective publishers. The other thing, the problem with writing a novel is that you can't sell a novel without having written it. Whereas a nonfiction book, you can do a sample chapter and an outline and you're good. I've done that. But the novel, it turns out they have to see the whole thing. So there we are.
I see.
I learned that I had to plunge in and write the damn thing. So.
And are you finding that to be a different process in a way for you? I mean, I know as a musician, I'm very motivated. Like I have to have a concert date set and the repertoire chosen in order to be motivated to practice.
Yep.
So I wonder, is it sort of a similar thing with you? You don't have the contract. So is it a little harder?
Well, that's the reason I quit my job, because many people write books on the side of having a job. I wrote 2 books on the side of having a job. It's nice to have the headspace free, like to really, and each of the books I wrote, I did take a month where I was in the country writing and doing my work on the side, but mainly focusing on that. And that's getting harder and harder to do in today's journalism climate. Writing was always my life goal. I always wanted to write a novel. And when I was in my 20s, I didn't become a music critic till I was almost 30. When I was in my 20s, I did write a novel, and I spent a lot of time doing it, and it feels very much like coming home, that process. It is a different process, and it is harder not having the contract, because you can give yourself the time. You can sort of luxuriate into the time, but I hope to keep motivated enough, at least by talking about it so much, that I have to deliver now. And you and everybody else is saying, well, when are you actually write it? I also, in 2016, I decided that I needed to shit or get off the pot. And I plunged into it while working. And I got like 30,000 words done. So I have a big chunk of it. I don't know if those are the 30,000 words that will end up being published, but I have a bunch of it on the table. And that changes. I'm not looking at a blank page in terms of going back to it now. I have a whole bunch of stuff done. Although unfortunately, the research gets dusty in your mind if you let it sit for a couple of years. And I've been poking at this thing for a really long time now. So it's important for me. And I'm hoping that will provide the motivation to keep it going. A friend of mine who's a very successful philosopher was saying, Anne, we really write these books for ourselves anyway. And she's so in love with the process that she almost doesn't want to let her magnum opus go. She keeps rewriting it, and she's published a lot, so she has that luxury. But that's been very inspiring to me too, is like, try not writing it on a deadline. Try actually doing a good job on it, because everything I write ends up at the very end, like, okay, there it goes. It's got to be in print. And so maybe I can get closer to what I really want to do by having the lack of a deadline. It's taking a while to lose the fight or flight syndrome of being a journalist for all these years. When you have a gun to your head, every day you've got to hand in something. And that I did find very wearing at a point too. I just stopped wanting to play.
Yeah.
Right. Of course, that's very understandable. It's hard to shift your mindset, because, how long did you work in journalism? How many years? You can't just undo that at the drop of a hat.
It's true, although I feel like it was a very easy parting from journalism. I was really ready to go, because I was getting, it just wasn't, I did it, I have no regrets. It's not like I think I did the wrong thing, but it was time for the next step. And so it's been nice how organic it's been, in terms of not, I was checked out mentally a little bit, in terms certainly of the deadline thing, before I left.
Actually, I know we were talking about your departure from journalism, but I'm going to bring it back around just a little bit to ask you about, you've written about mainstream venues, but I was really interested in the writing that you did about smaller ensembles and out-of-the-box performances and presentations. But that really resonates with us. We're kind of exploring that as well. And so I was wondering if you would share a bit about the different things that you've observed, some of the exciting things that people are doing, and what you find particularly exciting.
Yeah. I mean, it was always a challenge to me as the classical music critic of a major paper, because you want the smaller ensembles are our life's blood as a field. That's what feeds the field. That's what engages audiences. And the big touring artists, I mean, that's news too, but it's in a way the local people doing things that are more meaningful and more out of the box become much more exciting after a while. And I also certainly over the trajectory of my career became increasingly disillusioned with the big institutions, because I think that, you know, a lot of those huge institutions, valuable as their work is, have sucked the air and the money out of the room and made us think that classical music is impossible without them. And in fact, the most exciting classical music is happening without them. I ran into this in opera a lot, where I would say, you know, new opera is not so great. And people would say, how do you say that? New opera is fascinating and wonderful. And I would say, but at these big opera houses, it's terrible. People will say, why do you even write about that? Nobody pays attention to that. And I'm like, yes, but millions and millions of dollars are going into creating these white elephants of works that nobody wants in the name of creating opera product. So that's a background to my increasing feeling, and I've been saying it for a long time, that for the meaningful experiences often have come from smaller ensembles. And of course, right now in the age of the coronavirus shutdown, I think the smaller ensembles are even more energized in a way. I've seen people really take and run the idea of what can we do digitally, because we don't have the constraints. We don't have the payroll, and we have to keep ourselves alive, but there's a lot more freedom. There's a small opera company I've written about quite a bit called the In Series, which has been going for like 30 years, but it was taken over. The woman who founded it, whose life's blood it was, actually found a successor, and the organization kept going, which, as you know, is very rare for like a mom and pop organization to find a new pop. And the person they found was somebody whose work I had liked 10 years before, when he was a student, before he went off to Europe to be a director. Anyway, he came in with a bunch of really innovative ideas, and he has the freedom to say, what happens if Madame Butterfly is not Japanese? Like, how could we do the opera but remove Japan from it? His first production was a Verdi Requiem mashup with King Lear, where a woman was playing Lear, doing all of Lear's monologues, and there were 8 singers doing the Verdi Requiem with a piano, and they did the whole thing. And it sounds like it could either be great or really awful. You know, you go in and you're like, and it was really great. And I was like sitting there crying. But when you have that strong a personal reaction, then as a critic, you're also wrestling with like, okay, did that hit me in some way? Like, what is the objective truth of that? And yet I also feel it's immoral. If it made me cry, I can't ever pan something, you know what I mean? It's like, you have to reflect how much it moved you. So it was a very wonderful show, and it made me follow them for ages. And they have gone all digital next year, and they announced 2 months ago, sort of in the earlier days of the shutdown, an all digital season. And so they've been running with the creative possibilities of that and what that will let them do. And the founder is genuinely motivated. It's like, now I can work with singers anywhere I want, and it fits in with my sort of deconstruction, reconstruction. Because of course, what you don't want is to just do something online that's going to replicate what you did live and feel less satisfying. You want to find a way to make that grow. And I know you're not asking about online, but on the other hand, that's much in our minds right now as we deal with this shutdown. And interesting to me to see who reacts to it well and who reacts to it, you know, with resistance. And as we all know, the big institutions have generally not been very good at doing online. They just, you know, park a camera, or they have state-of-the-art park a camera. But they've spent a lot of money on it, some of them. But as far as coming up with innovative ways to use the medium, I think that's a real example of the kinds of things that small organizations can do better. But as far as other, I mean, there are so many small organizations doing so many innovative things. I know the Fifth House Ensemble in Chicago is an ensemble that's also started a festival, and the festival is about teaching composers and musicians, but also about helping them think of ways to deal with the world we're in, like giving them entrepreneurial skills. So the concerts they give, they have to help come up with the concerts that they give. And I think that's a wonderful idea for a festival that a lot of the bigger festivals stuck in their template don't necessarily do. So that's another, like, and that's also an ensemble using its power to help learn together. You know, that's the kind of thing where whatever level you're on, I think you can benefit a lot from partaking of some kind of enterprise like that. So, I mean, those are a couple of examples that come to mind.
That's really fascinating. Yeah, thank you.
And I know, like in college, I went to Eastman, and they did do a pretty good job. I was there when they started the entrepreneurial side of the school, and I just was at the very beginning of that. But before that, there was really no guidance in how to come up with interesting concerts. But not only that, but it's like, how do you make it happen?
How do you make it happen? And you know, this is also, to go back to the earlier question for one moment, when you're talking about doing work by female composers, I know this is such an issue because the pianist Sharon Sue did a wonderful blog post about her year of presenting only music by female composers, and how it kind of pulls the rug out from under you, because as a classically trained musician, you're so used to knowing the masterpieces, and you go and get the Dover score of the masterpiece, and there's a million recordings, and you know it's great. And suddenly you can't find the score, and you have to reconstruct the score, and the score is really expensive, and then you don't really know if it's good or not. And like, what if, especially when you're trained that it's supposed to be all great, what if you spend hours and hours and days learning a piece and it's actually not that good? And then you get the male critics coming in, and they're just ready to cherry pick that stuff. Oh, we never heard of it. Oh, she sounds like Mendelssohn. She sounds like, you know, and it's really, really daunting. So as far as entrepreneurship, it extends to repertoire choice now more than ever, as we're desperately trying to diversify and make clear what a rich repertoire we have. That's a very different spirit from the way that conservatories used to be run. And I think they're trying to come to terms with that, but there are still teachers, as we know, who've been teaching for 50 years and are like, I'm going to teach you the 10 orchestral excerpts you need to get your audition, and don't waste your time with the other shit. And overcoming that mindset in the field is a huge issue. And that ties into race issues. It's all part of the same ball of problems.
Right. And I mean, we've experienced that ourselves. Erica worked tirelessly for hours and hours and hours correcting errata in parts that was, well, even to rent it was very, very expensive. We had one performance that we were able to use the score and the parts for, and we were not allowed to put it online at all. And so it just, everything you just said rings, it's going to ring true over my house for 10 years.
It's incredibly frustrating. We don't think about it. As a critic, I had never thought about that issue. I remember you talking about it, little Erica, but it has taken these encounters to bring it home to me. I'm just like, why don't they perform more different music? And I was like, well, it's hard. But I didn't mean to cut you off in your question either. It just rang a bell for for that particular issue.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm currently working on a project going through IMSLP, through all of this music written by women.
Oh, right.
Piano music. And I'm doing this with another Twitter friend. We're going through all the piano music. We're putting together a spreadsheet, and we want to ultimately have a resource for piano teachers so that they can find intermediate and beginning piano pieces written by women. But it is so arduous, and I mean, it's definitely worth it, and I'm delighted to do it. And I'm finding some amazing pieces. But what kills me is I'll read, you know, they'll maybe have 2 pieces in IMSLP available. And I'll read the biography of the composer, if there is one. Often there isn't, of course. And it'll say she wrote a lot, you know, 20 piano pieces. And you're like, where are the rest?
Yep. And even musicologists working hard, it doesn't the music publishing business is, for one thing, different now than it was anyway. It's like harder to get it out there. You have almost more gatekeeping because there's less publishing going on. I mean, the fact you have the internet, of course, but it's funny. I hope that the moment we're in is going to lead to opening of the floodgates eventually, that demand, because you're obviously not the only person feeling that way. Like, where are all the pieces, you know, that gradually awareness is opening up, you know, to some degree.
Yeah, I think so. And what's interesting is, as I've been doing this, I will record something or say something on Twitter about, oh, I just found this piece. It's great for beginning pianists. And I will get so many responses. Well, what is it? Where is it? Where's a recording? You know, so people want it. And that's exciting. So
absolutely, yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, how many years can you play the same exercises? You know, it's
exactly.
It becomes rote and not art. It's my husband's niece quit playing the cello, and she was very good at it, but she just said it wasn't creative enough, and she became a jazz vocalist. And her parents are classical musicians, so she's not ignorant about it. She just felt that it wasn't scratching that itch for her, you know, and jazz improv definitely was. And,
Wow.
That's very cool. All right, next question. So one of the things that I've always been impressed about with you, Anne, is you have qualities that I think I do not possess. So I'm very jealous. I feel like, and so I want to know if this is true or not. It seems like you just embrace opportunity when it comes your way. Like I think about the fact that you went over to Europe. It seems like at a pretty young age to start working. And like, I would not dream of doing that. I'm a wimp. So can you talk a little bit about, you know, have you had moments in your life at those points, at these junctures where you've had doubts and you've had to kind of internally fight with yourself? Or are you more of the type of woman that just says, I'm going to just do it. I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to see what happens.
I am definitely somebody who spends 10 years dithering about a decision. And then when the decision is made, I do it. And it looks like I did this really radical thing, but it's partly because for the 10 years previous, I say 10 years because I've basically made a huge change in my life just about every 10 years. But you know, my father died when I was 12, and my mother remarried when I was 14, and we moved from Brooklyn, New York to Roswell, New Mexico, where I am sitting now. And making that kind of radical social change in the middle of high school, going from a small elite private school in New York to this huge high school, it seemed huge to me, in New Mexico, and cruising Maine, and I mean all the women on roller skates serving you the hamburgers. It was like I'd entered a movie, and it was a shock, and it was really, really good for me. I had been for 10 years in the same small elite school, and suddenly I was in this entirely new situation, and it really opened my eyes to a lot of things. It's been a huge influence in my life, and I think that led me to the idea that change is a really good thing, like that embracing change that seems uncomfortable can be an incredible growth opportunity. And then I decided in the middle of college that I wanted to live in Europe. I traveled to Europe and I loved it so much. I felt like I had found my place in the world that made more sense to me. And I said, I have to live there. I don't want to do a program. I don't want to do junior year abroad. I want to go and live in Europe and try that. And so after graduation, that's what I did. And I was terrified. I was really, really terrified, but I felt like I couldn't go back. And to compound it, I got a job offer from Deutsche Grammophon to be the personal assistant to the president of Deutsche Grammophon in New York on graduation weekend. And I'm like, do I take this job offer, loving music as I do, or do I jump off into the unknown to go be a writer in Germany? And sat there with that weekend, and then discovered I had won the fiction writing prize, and said that's a sign, and I went to Europe. And that, of course, worked out really well for me too. So I had this model early on. I was 20 when I moved to Europe, and I graduated from college early. And so there was definitely an idea that change is an invigorating thing and a really uncomfortable thing, because I'm a complete homebody and I'm a Cancer, and I like to have everything be the same. But it's never ever been a bad thing. And so having had that experience through my life, I tend to embrace them when it comes. And I am thrilled that I was able to walk away from the Washington Post, because I thought that was going to be the kind of thing that was a golden handcuffs, and that you would end your years doing that. And I was so scared about what would happen if I left that security. And it's been so incredibly wonderful, and I was so ready to do it. And I'm really, really fortunate that I was able to do it. But it's one more case where I feel like you come back alive then. You're sort of aware of who you are and what you really want, and it makes you reassess possibilities, and you're not so locked into your rut that you can't make a change. As I said, I was fortunate to be able to make that happen. I mean, a number of things lined up to make it possible, and a lot of encouragement from my parents, which is also unusual, that your parents encourage you to leave a successful and high-profile job because they know that they think you should be doing something else, or they know that you want to be doing something else, is a rare and wonderful thing. But yeah, and that's part of my raging against big institutions is I don't fit very well in big institutions myself, although I've always kind of played in that sandbox. But you know, we're in a creative field, and being able to sort of re-look at the creative process and what really turns you on, and reassess yourself in your life is an important thing, and a really lucky thing. Not to say that it's not incredibly painful to make those changes sometimes. The move to Washington was excruciating. My husband almost didn't come, but we made it.
Wow, that's very powerful. And I needed to hear you say that today.
Yes.
So
I mean,
you.
the timing is amazing. Yes. Thank you.
Well, it's funny because I was doing an interview years ago and some major head of an opera company said, people should change these big jobs every 10 years. You get kind of burned out and you need a new, and I was like, why would you ever leave a job like that? And the funny thing is that guy didn't leave his job, and he proved it by staying way too long in the institution.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
But I gave an interview in 2013. And I just was reminded of it because I want to use the video clip for something. And I was watching it again. And I say very vehemently that you should change your job every 10 years in that interview. And I was so pleased to be able to write back and say, by the way, you have to change my title because I actually took my own advice and I did it. And it was nice to feel I lived up to that vehement statement of mine 5 years ago or however many years ago.
That's
well
excellent.
done. Yeah. So your April feature in Vanity Fair resonated with me greatly. You compared this pandemic to, quote, a giant hook in a nightmare vaudeville performance, yanking artists off stage without warning, end quote, which is exactly how it felt.
Yeah.
And I admit, when I discovered your article, I was looking to it for some peace or hopefulness, but it's sort of pendulumed between, hopeful and also bleak outlooks, and to how this thing is going to play out. So you're very active on social media, and we talked briefly about this earlier with accounts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So looking back on the past few months, what are your thoughts on musicians and social media, and maybe more in depth? Have you seen any drastic changes in the way artists approach each platform?
It's interesting. That's a good bundle of questions. As far as the outlook in the Vanity Fair piece, I see so much potential in this moment, but I feel that to assert that without acknowledging the devastating pain, the loss of livelihood for many people, the career changes for many people is, disrespectful. I mean, you have to see that pain is there and wonderful. Some people are going to come out great, we're going to reinvent ourselves on digital media and that's all super. And other people can't do that. And, it's a very painful time. And it's important, especially as a journalist, when you get your thesis and run with it, that you acknowledge the pain. So I was trying not to be too Pollyanna, although I did talk to some people who were really enervated by finding possibilities in this moment. As far as social media, my work there was colored by the fact that when I was at the New York Times as a freelancer from 2001 to 2007, so as all this stuff was getting going, they prohibited me from having my own webpage, my own website. And because people would think it was affiliated with the Times, because I was such a part of the Times that even people at the Times thought I was a staffer at the Times, but I was a freelancer. And so I was really resentful of this because as a freelancer, you need a website. And even if I was a little ahead of the curve on that, imagine now, they can't get away with it now, but back then they
Sure.
could. So I came to the Post with this head of steam of I want to use Facebook and Twitter and all these things, and I want to blog. And so I did blog. I blogged for 2.5 years at the Post, and then blogging's end kind of coincided with the birth of my son when I didn't have time to do what it was required of me at the newspaper to blog. They wanted 5 pieces of fresh content every day in addition to everything else you were doing. And so I was getting up at 8 in the morning and writing last night's review, and then going to the office, and then going out to the night's concert, and then coming home and then writing my blog post, and then getting up and doing it all over again. And my theory about why blogging kind of went away as a phenomenon is that everybody suddenly realized it was not sustainable and none of us could do this. It has changed a lot as an animal. But also, I mentioned Doug McLennan before, talking about the watering hole for the artist. Talked about how social media is a part of that. I mean, he was ahead of the curve with having lots of bloggers on his website and, encouraging lots of different perspectives. And of course, that's now part and parcel of the way we think. But I also always say to organizations and people about social media that it is social media. And if you take away the word social, it is useless. And you see institutions especially thinking that it's a way to advertise their concerts. And my standard line is, if you were at a party and somebody was standing in the corner and every time you went up to him, he goes, "I am playing tomorrow at 8 o'clock," you would back away. And that's the misuse of social media that some people can get into, that it really has to be social. And I think even the artist accounts that have somebody running them, unless you have somebody who's really good at social media running them, like the Kira Foundation, there's somebody there used to be somebody there who was great and really funny, and like you would get in discussions with them. But it's worthless if you don't have that. It's only as good as what you put into it. It is just a medium. I like to keep all three of them separate. And I think artists' use of it really reflects that. It's very funny, the differences in the ways artists use it. Some artists are just right out there. I mean, Christine Gerke is like everybody's best friend on social media. And I think it's buoyed her popularity tremendously. There are other people who just wouldn't be that comfortable doing that on social media. But who else is good? Stephen Isserlis, the cellist, is good. There are a bunch of sort of more unlikely, more conventional musicians who have found exactly the way to ride their quirks on social media in really successful ways. Like who isn't interested in hearing what a musician is doing, you know? I mean, Erica, I know you practice on social media, and I think that's amazing. That's like really the use of it. The standard line is that audiences are hungry for a peep behind the curtain, and that's partly because these institutions have erected these curtains, and music is all about communication. And so everybody needs to find their own way to communicate. And some people are able to do that on social media really successfully. And that's great. Others are not comfortable there, and that's fine too. You know, it shouldn't be a required template, because template is the antithesis of what works on social media. Of course, during the shutdown, you've seen different uses of social media. What happened is a lot of artists jumped in to do daily podcasts or whatever, and a lot of them just had to stop at a point because it's been 60 days now and I'm just out, I'm done. And Igor Levit, the pianist, Alex Ross at The New Yorker was working on a big feature about him when the shutdown happened. And he happened to be somebody who used the shutdown moment amazingly with all of these recitals. And he finally stopped after 60 days because it was taking it out of him. But he did say, and it was really interesting to me, that I think the end of the article says, I discovered it doesn't really matter to me where I play. Like, it's about playing and reaching the audience, and the format doesn't matter quite as much. Of course, when you're coming from a perspective of, oh, I play at Carnegie Hall all the time, that's an easier thing to say than if you're coming from not that. But it is eye-opening about how we define success in this world and how we keep putting it in the frame of those institutions. And there are so many more ways to do it. And I think social media is helping people kind of to throw off some of those bonds and start exploring. It facilitates the exploration of different ways, you know, for those who like to use it.
You know, it's funny too. I mean, this seems kind of silly, but for pianists, it's been the talk of Twitter a little bit. It's been very comforting for all pianists at all different levels to hear these world famous pianists that are doing this, that are live streaming something every day on their out of tune pianos. You know, because for some reason, in some goofy little trite way, it's like evening the playing field or something. But there's something really special and endearing about that. I think, you know.
No, I mean, the humanizing of it, absolutely. If it's not, I mean, the Met Gala, the Metropolitan Opera had all their different singers from their living rooms, and that was it was like a commodification of the human element. You know, it's like, we're going to use this to market, you know, and that kind of turned me off, but I'm kind of sour about the way the Met has handled this whole thing anyway. Like, let's shut everybody down and fire you all and then use you all to help raise money for us.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And so I had a little bit of edge going into that. But no, absolutely, the humanizing is key. And I mean, it always has been, you know, it's just that our industry has become so much bigger, and, you know, the big institutions, you're miles away even from the artist, and to remember what the vibrations are, whether it's on a screen close up or because you're sitting in a room with 20 other people because you can only have 20 because it's social distancing time. I think you're going to get more of a personal connection. I mean, I think the socially distanced concert is an opportunity in a way, if anybody can afford economically to keep putting it on. I mean, that's the big hitch in America, because you need that ticket revenue. And in Europe, you can have your subsidies helping you out, you know, to bridge that. But the idea of a concert with 25 people in the room hearing you know, we've all been to concerts when it rained or there was a blizzard and somehow the room was really empty. And there's always a charge to those concerts.
That's a very refreshing look at that. I hadn't thought of that, but that's neat. Yeah.
Well, it's like a house concert. We all know house concerts are a really exciting way to hear music, you know, and
exactly.
now everybody's going to be giving them.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's our bread and butter.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
50 people or less. I don't know. That's our sweet spot because you feel like you can connect, you can walk around and talk to people and really answer questions about, you know, women composers and the pieces and how we came to be and all of those things where you don't have those necessarily as opportunities in bigger concert halls.
Bigger concert hall. I quote constantly an interview I did, God, it's been 15 years ago, probably, with the Chiara Quartet, which is now disbanded, but they went strong for a while. But they used to always book, every time they went on a concert tour, they would book in a bar as well as in the regular concert hall. And they said that almost without exception, they found the bar audiences more involved and more responsive. And they didn't need to be pandered to at all. They would be cheering for Bartok. Like, they got it if you were rapping. Often I find that too, that musical tyros, you know, people who have no experience of classical music have much better ears because they don't worry about what they're supposed to hear. They're used to listening in a more unmediated way, and there's not as much should around it for them. But the Chiara Quartet's other discovery or realization was that you're never going to get that bar audience into the concert hall, and it's never going to economically pay you the way the concert hall has been paying. I mean, the other casualty / opportunity of COVID, I think it's going to really screw up the whole economic model we've been working on, and it's going to shake it up tremendously. And that for musicians is horribly painful, even if it leads ultimately, you know, maybe in 20 years, it's going to be a better way and a more direct way. And, you know, because people are going to be feeling out all different avenues, but it's not pretty right now. But I keep thinking of that bar audience really jamming on the music, you know, for a quartet that wasn't really getting paid very much for doing that concert.
So our next question is sort of veering off the professional track. You seem like a person of many different interests. And so we were curious that about what you like to do in your spare time, because it seems like that might also feed your professional interests as well.
Absolutely.
So I hear you're a knitter and that you've also started running recently. So tell us some about that.
Well, I was a knitter for years, although I kind of lost my knitting mojo when we moved a couple years ago. I don't know quite what did it, but having a child obviously took up a lot of the time that I was spending knitting. I also spin. I have a couple of spinning wheels.
Wow.
And my husband got me a loom, and I said, this is just too many hobbies. I can't do the loom. But I did like I have a little runner that I made, but the knitting is great. Knitting is a great thing. I started doing knitting and spinning as a way to focus my thinking when I was listening to music. I wish I could do it during a concert. It's so great to have that little bit of your brain occupied that otherwise might run off on tangent. And I remember doing it once at an academic conference, and I thought I would be laughed at, and all these academics came up to me and were like, God, I wish I did that. That looks really great. And running, I was always the bookish, out of shape person all my life. My brother is incredibly athletic, and I reached a point where it was like, okay, I'm hitting middle age now, and you can't sort of go, oh, I can always take it off again. And a lot of people had done Couch to 5K, and which is that app that takes you literally from nothing to 5K in 9 weeks. And I just started doing it, and one thing led to another, and I've been running, and then I injured my ankle, and I joined a CrossFit gym, and now we have a rowing machine, and suddenly I'm like a person who works out. And that was, you know, if I can do it, truly anybody can do it, because I was in my 50s and pretty out of shape, and I'm not a fast runner by any means. The rowing machine has been great because I'm actually built, I'm 6 feet tall, and I'm definitely built for rowing. And in running, I'm more the Clydesdale surrounded by the rabbits, but in rowing, I feel like I can make a difference. And of course, it's great for your mental health as well as your physical health. And the time of COVID, that's why everybody's running now in the shutdown time, because you get out, and we live near a huge park, and I can do forest bathing while I run and listening to different kinds of music or audiobooks. It's really, really wonderful. So yeah, I'm a passionate but terrible runner, and right now I'm a part-time homeschooling Zoom enabling teacher. It's hard to remember when I had hours to do anything, but I do love to cook. Like, I do all those girly domestic things. Cooking is a huge thing for me, and that I have really enjoyed, like the rest of the world again during the shutdown. I've made my bagels and made my donuts and all those things that people do during the shutdown.
Sure. What are your top 2 dishes that you make the best?
Oh boy, I make a lot of things. I have a recipe that I submitted to a British online cookbook that was created to raise money for musicians at the time of the shutdown. And they went on social media and solicited recipes from people. And I sent in a recipe for my stepfather's flank steak, which is a pretty simple marinade for flank steak. But it really, I say it's one of the things that reconciled me to moving to New Mexico when I was 15. And it's one of the things my son lives for. And it's like this family tradition recipe. So it's not particularly complicated, but I love that.
That's dear.
I do all kinds of, I just made my husband an elaborate Black Forest cake from a British baking show recipe because we had been watching the Great British Baking Show. And I actually made a cake that looked kind of fancy, which was pretty great because my cakes have usually been made with love and have to be looked at with understanding as the top layer. So it goes sliding off. But I did make that. My husband's birthday was a couple weeks ago. So I have that little triumph documented, of course, on social media, because what is social media for other than to document our cooking triumphs? I mean, after all.
So true.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna go and take it and post it.
Right, exactly. It's
as we're
Instagram.
talking about it. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you asked about social media before, and this is not about spare time, but I do, as I've mentioned, I believe in using each of those platforms separately. I always find it a little weird when I see somebody's picture on Facebook and then see the same picture on Instagram. And I've always tried to, I mean, obviously, if I've written a big story, I will put it on all those media, but I try to make Instagram really about visual stuff and ways to tell a story visually, and Facebook is about longer sort of blog post things, and Twitter is more about breaking news. And I have very deep feelings myself for how I use those 3 platforms. But
did you develop those intentionally, or did they just kind of develop organically, your philosophies around?
Developed organically. I mean, I'm not the only person who's done that. And it was really funny. I was comparing notes with another critic who had a firm dictate, and I forget, it was like he used Facebook professionally and he used Twitter personally. It was something that was totally backwards from the way I did it. Because it also used to be practically that Facebook used to drive 40% of traffic to the Washington Post. And then they did that big algorithmic change, and all of a sudden it became like 5%. And it was this huge drop in everybody's numbers. So Facebook used to be like, if you didn't, that was it. He only used Facebook personally. And I said, if you're not putting your stories on Facebook, you're losing out completely, because Twitter used to drive like 3% of the traffic and Facebook was 40% of the traffic. And of course, my use of social media was also influenced by the fact that the paper encouraged it and was counting your clicks all the time. And in my effort to demonstrate that classical music did have a vibrant following, I was very thoughtful about how I wanted to position, sometimes you tweet out the same thing, but you try a slightly different wording and see if that works. Although I've never been somebody who blankets my Twitter feed. I know people who use Twitter successfully say that you should just keep tweeting every hour or so if you want attention for something, because everybody just reads past it. And I haven't, if you look at the number of tweets I've done in my whole time on Twitter, it's not really that high. I try to be selective. I don't like just spamming people. But you have to accept with Twitter that you're putting a drop into an ocean and seeing what comes out of it. It's hard to make a real impact there.
I think your approach is really interesting because it's very intentional and creative. I spend a lot of time thinking about the role of social media in my own life. And is it detracting from my creativity, or is it adding to my creativity? So I think your approach is really refreshing and encouraging, because it seems like you get a lot of nourishment from it. And
I do. Yeah. I mean, social media was made for me. I'm like a very happy social media user. I do it a lot anyway. And it was also exhilarating when I quit my job to realize that Monday I woke up and I'm not employed anymore, but I still have all these, I still have a world. I'm still me. And one of my mentors in the 90s quit his job as music critic of Time magazine to write a novel. And he really felt like he'd stepped into a pit. It was a different time. And he was up in the country writing his book, and he was going for days with no contact. And I was really prepared for that. I thought, I will stop being me in the way I've been, and I'm not going to be getting contacted about things anymore. And that's okay. I'm ready for that. And it didn't work out like that at all. I was like still contacted, and, especially in the time of COVID when everybody wants to talk because that's all we can do. But I thought that's a real difference social media has made. When the paper wants you to build your brand for the paper, you're left with a brand, you're left with a presence that, you can ignore it. I don't have to post anything. And I did start a website just to have a website, which is really useful. People can reach me. And, you know, when I do write something, I can put it up there and I link all my, you know, blog posts and whatever. But I have a blog on the website, and it's been very interesting because I don't need to get readers, and I don't care how many readers I have. I'm so sick of counting how many readers I have, and I'm not chasing them. I don't engage any of those analytics. And so it's like, what do I want to, it's when I have something I want to say that I can't say on social media, or it needs to be longer. And I haven't really used it in the time of COVID at all, because I've been scratching that itch through doing other kinds of talking, you know. But it really did make me think about the ways we choose to express ourselves, and, you know, what media are useful for what moments in your life. And I really, the other thing I found about blog posts now is I used to have an idea and I'd write it and it would be clever and it would go into print, and then I'd think, but the nuance, or but you could have said that. And now we were talking, brings back to what we were saying before about not having a deadline for anything. Now I don't have to print it. It's like, but wait, you didn't think about that. So I'll think through it and it will take me somewhere further. And I can sit on it for 6 months if I want to, but I don't have to come up with a clever thing and then put it out there and get all the instant gratification of that. And it's like blowing soap bubbles, you know. After a while you want something, maybe to make something in stone instead, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we're going to go ahead and move forward to this or that. So
the very light side of our interview.
That seems so like Nickelodeon 1990s. I'm going to cut it.
Like bounces across the bottom of the screen.
This or that.
Yeah. Okay. So this or that, you choose one of the items only.
Okay. So the first question is, if you had to choose, would you use a pencil or a pen?
I write fiction in pencil. I have a special fiction pencil. I write notes in pen.
Fair.
Are you left-handed or right-handed? That's
I'm
not a question, but you're right-handed? Okay. I was wondering because I'm left-handed, so if I were to try to write a novel, which, yeah, right, it would make a mess.
Same. Yeah, you get like the, yeah.
Exactly. Well, I get it from being right-handed too, because you go across the lines you have.
Sure.
But yeah, left-handed is different in that.
So what kind of pencil do you use? You say you use a special pencil.
I do. I have like, it's a drawing pencil with a replaceable lead, you know, like an artist sketch pencil.
Yeah.
I like a soft lead. I like it to be, I mean, it's not really thick. It's thin enough to write on a line with, but yeah. I really like the tactile quality. Now, that said, I confess the current book I'm working on, it's not all handwritten. I mean, I'm so used to being on the computer, it's like second nature. So I just do that. But my preference is to be sitting at a desk writing in longhand. It slows you down enough, and that restores the kind of creative energy between what you're thinking and what you're writing. But of course, you have to get back and practice after being on a computer so long, because it is slower and your hand begins to cramp when you're not used to it. You know, you have to sort of retrain that muscle very literally.
Well, and isn't it kind of tricky too, when you're doing it by hand, if you decide you want to rearrange paragraphs or that type of thing?
Well, I mean, I love the tactile thing of, you know, moving and posting notes and cutting and whatever, but, or, you know, then typing it up when you revise, when you're typing your notes into the thing, that's your first revision right there. Yeah. And then you can take that revision and begin cutting it up and moving it around. I love to mark up my revisions too. Like, I really like there to be a tactile, you know, my father was a visual artist, so I grew up in a home where there were lots of, you know, writing implements and everything was very tactile and expressed visually. So I'm a much better visual thinker than my eye is better than my ear, which is a great irony for a classical music critic, but there it is.
That's interesting. That's really cool. So I'll just picture you in a room with like paper all over the floor. And
that would be kind of, yeah, well, that actually describes my study, come to think of it. So yeah.
Okay, the next this or that question is savory or sweet?
Yes, both. But, probably on balance more sweet than savory, but I can do either really happily.
It sounds like it. Wow, excellent.
I love food. I've always loved food. That's why it's really good that I finally discovered running.
Excellent.
Okay, fiction or nonfiction?
Fiction. That one's kind of easy. I read nonfiction, and of course I had to read a lot for work, and there's many great nonfiction books, but fiction is my home completely.
So the next question is not a this or that. It's more long form, but what is a place in DC or New York City that everyone should visit?
Well, New York is still home. I could live in DC for 30 years and New York will always be home. But I always take visitors in New York to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge and go down through Brooklyn where I grew up and end up at the wharf by the barge music barge for Brooklyn Ice Cream Company ice cream, and then take the water taxi back if you can time it right. I think that's like the quintessential New York outing. It's a little, I mean, it's not off the beaten track because the Brooklyn Bridge, last time I walked over, it was like wall to wall people, but it takes you a little bit past, you know, the Empire State Building. DC is harder because I have a very funny relationship to DC. I mean, I'd say you have to go to the National Museum of African American History and Culture because that's an amazing mind-altering place. It's hardly an original or insider place, but it is a very important place.
Those are all really good.
Yeah.
I want to go to New York after this is all done and do that like trip, because you also said ice cream, so you got me there.
You really do. You go first when you get off the Brooklyn Bridge, and you go around and you go first to Grimaldi's Pizzeria, which you recognize by the line outside, which I'm sure is all socially distanced now. And then you go to the ice cream place. But the ice cream place you can eat outside. You can do most of that even now. You know, the ice cream place you have to go in to get the ice cream. But
I think field trip. I think we need to take a road trip. That's what I'm hearing here.
Or just do it for your art music debut. You know.
Yeah.
All right, your next question is, what is your favorite country outside the United States?
Yeah, picking a favorite. It's like, what's your favorite book? That's a hard one.
I
lived in Germany for 11 years, so Germany is still kind of like a second home. And we have a family home in England where we spend time every year, and that's hugely important to me, up in the north of England. But if I have to pick a country, I probably would say Greece. I've loved Greece. My major in college, as I said, was ancient Greek. On the strength of that, in the days when I was living in Munich, as I said, done a lot of different jobs. I was editing travel guidebooks, and then I began writing travel guidebooks. And I got assigned a book on the Greek islands because the editor saw on my resume that I had majored in ancient Greek, and he's like, "Oh, you know Greece." And I didn't disabuse him of the idea that an ancient Greek degree made me an expert in the Greek islands. And I got to spend 10 weeks of all expenses paid travel in the Greek islands. And I've been to Greece a few times, but that kind of culminated making it my place. And yet there's so much to be explored there. It's really an amazing country. There's just so much to do there that hasn't been done. And it's enough off the beaten track that you don't get there all the time. It's a little harder to get to than some for some reason.
Okay, well, I have that on my list now too.
Well, believe me, when you go, I've got a book for you.
That's fantastic.
Okay, so here's the last question. What's the most memorable performance you've ever attended?
Oof, you know, I have a bucket, not a bucket list. What's the opposite? The list you look back on, the things that were bucket lists of sort of musical highlights. But it's still a hard, I mean, one that has always stayed with me was hearing Kurt Masur conduct the Leipzig Gewandhaus Orchestra in Bruckner's Seventh in the church where Bruckner played the organ for years and where he's buried. So it was a smaller audience and you're in this space, and Masur understands Bruckner like nobody's business. I think he was Bruckner was his greatest thing that he did. And it was just like mind bending. And the combination of place and experience, it was again, a very tactile thing. And I think that the ring cycle in Washington recently, like in my own little town, it was really an amazing piece of art, and it developed over a really long time. And I've seen a bunch of ring cycles, and it delved into character in a way. And also the singers have been living with it for so long that they were connected with the characters in a way. I saw the production in San Francisco and it didn't do the same thing for me at all. And I saw that before the whole thing came in Washington. It was just incredibly powerful. And I brought a friend who'd never seen Wagner before, a colleague who'd been writing about it and saying, "Oh, who can sit through 5 hours? And oh my God." And I remember her coming out in intermission saying, "I didn't know I'd be moved." It was like, yeah, we forget that part when we're talking about the long Germanic opera ranting at you. But my husband and I, when we saw the Siegfried early in its genesis, we came out and had dinner and we talked about Siegfried read for 2 hours. I mean, about the opera and about what motivated the characters. And it was like, you're seldom really pulled into that world by opera. You should be, but the operas are familiar and we know them so long that we forget. And it was really amazing to be drawn into engaging with the work in that way through something you saw on stage. That's how it should always be. You know, we should always all be coming out and talking about Beethoven and why he made these choices and what he did or whatever the piece is. But it doesn't always happen. So, and those are both big institution moments, and I should be quoting something small and intimate, and I have those too, but those are the ones that come to mind right now.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
It has been amazing to have you with us.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure to talk to you guys.
We're so thankful that you took the time out of your day to engage with us and have a little bit of community and just hang out for a little while.
Now more than ever, it's a wonderful thing to do.
It is.
Absolutely. Well, your career has been so inspiring, and I really just can't believe this hour just happened. So it's really, really, really cool. Very good.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Anne.
Great.
All right.
You guys play when I can.
Oh yeah, that's so good. Awesome. Okay. Be well.
You too. Bye.
Bye.